So if you haven't heard yet, popular megachurch pastor T.D. Jakes has transitioned leadership of the Potter's House Church in Dallas, Texas, to his daughter and his son-in-law. And we found out about this about a week ago. Haven't got to talk about it yet, but there are some very important things that I think we can learn from the situation. There's also some big concerns and red flags in this scenario that if we don't take a hard look at them, if we don't notice them, these red flags have led to spiritual abuse in many churches before. So whether you are a part of Potter's House or not, whether you love them, whether you hate them, whether you are a T.D. Jakes fan or you are his biggest critic, there's something for us to learn today. Now, we are not going to talk about the allegations against T.D. Jakes. We're not going to talk about the court proceedings, any of that. We talked about those in some other videos. You can check them out here. But today, I just want to talk about this transition of power. And again, what are the concerns? What are the red flags? And what can we learn from this? And of course, we're going to have the big bad word on the block in the church come into play. It appears like nepotism. And if you've heard me talk about this before, we are not big fans of nepotism or even the appearance of nepotism in the church, because in many, not all, but in many spiritual abuse scenarios and spiritually abusive environments, nepotism plays a role in it, because we will protect no one like we'll protect our family. So if you have one family or a couple of families who hold all the power in a church, they hold all the influence, they hold all the authority, they hold all the decision making, things can go sideways really fast. And some of you have experienced it. You know exactly what I'm talking about, because you've been on the other side of that authority, that influence, that power going sideways in a bad way. And guys, it can happen like that. Doesn't take very long at all. So what I want to do, I want to go ahead and I want to listen to, it's sped up a little bit. I've cut some of the silences out. I took just one piece of this. I've also took out a lot of clapping, because the Potter's House has a lot of clapping. It seemed like every time T.D. Jakes would say something, there might be a minute worth of clapping. So I've cut down about 4 minutes of this just so that you can get the basic idea and hear from T.D. Jakes, hear from his daughter, Sarah, hear from his son-in-law, Torre, kind of just about this transition. And so we'll watch this together and we'll talk about it and what it means for the church.
It's legacy. Not because they're kin, but because they're the kind. They've immersed themselves into the DNA of this church for years.
All right, so let's go ahead and talk about it right off the bat. There's a couple of red flags. The first thing that he's talking about here is T.D. Jakes says this is legacy. One pastor leaving a church and another pastor coming into that church is not a familial legacy issue. It should not be a familial legacy issue. Now, are there situations where the son of a pastor may be the best candidate, okay? Where a family member of a pastor may be the best candidate to lead that church forward? Absolutely. I think it's much more rare than we make it today. I think those people need to be clear above and beyond when it's a family member, the best candidate, and the whole church needs to see that. I think people from the outside of the church would probably be able to see that, okay? But even if it is a family member of a pastor, okay, so you're not passing the baton. It's just a coincidence. So it's not a legacy issue, because while it may hit closer to you if you're a pastor leaving and you have a family member stepping into this role, the reality is this is about the church, the vision of this church. This is about what God is doing in this community of local believers. It is not about your legacy. And anytime a pastor is worried about their legacy in a transition, they're going to try to protect things. They're going to try to hold on to things. And we are going to be looking at this thing through a human lens. This is not about any person's legacy. It's not about a family's legacy. This is about Jesus and what this church is doing. Any church, the line should be, this is about Jesus and what he wants to do in this next season of our church. You should bless the person that's coming in. But once we start talking about legacy, it is no longer just about Jesus. It's about us. It's about our legacy. It's about our family. It's about how you remember me. So by kind of starting this whole section and this introduction of their new pastors, by talking about legacy, I think that T.D. Jakes did a disservice, okay? And then the camera's panning. He's talking about his daughter. He's talking about Torre. And as he's talking about them, he says that, they've immersed themselves in this church. This isn't about kin. It's not about family. It's about them being the right kind of people. Yet, I don't hear any evidence that they've interviewed anybody else or that they've entertained anybody else as potential leaders of this church. And as you're going to see, it doesn't look like anybody else had a role in deciding who the next leader of this church would be, except for T.D. Jakes. And I'm just going to say this: a pastor should never have the final say or the majority of the say about their successor. Okay. Pastors don't choose their successors. The church and the leadership of the church, outside of that pastor who is leaving, should be choosing the successor. Now, the pastor should definitely have a voice in what they see the church needing next, maybe some gaps in their own leadership that they say, hey, I didn't do this well. It would be great if this next person could do this. Absolutely. Give them a voice, honor them. But a pastor shouldn't be choosing their own successor. So here he starts out, he's talking about legacy, and now legacy is competing with Jesus and what he wants to do next in this scenario. He's talking about, because he knows people are going to have questions, this isn't about kin or familial ties. It's about them being the right kind of people. But it also shows and gives evidence that T.D. Jakes is making this decision, it looks like, almost unilaterally, okay? And then he starts talking about them being inside the DNA of the church.
Sit quiet, preach. What you didn't know, from November forward, they've been running the church anyway.
Did you hear that? What you didn't know, they've been here, they preached, they've embedded themselves in the DNA of the church. What you didn't know is since September, they've been running the church anyway. And then you get the applause, you get the yelling, yay, nepotism. I always hate it when you see churches enter into a situation like this, and then what do? They're giving standing ovations and raucous applause for nepotism. Okay, it never works out well, or rarely works out well. And we've got to stop celebrating these churches that become family businesses and instead say, what does God have next for our church? Okay. Is it always nepotism when a family member steps in? Absolutely not. But we should be very careful to avoid it. But instead, T.D. Jakes just drops a bomb on this church and they don't even hear it. They just celebrate. Hey, y'all didn't know it, but I actually hadn't been pastoring this church. I actually hadn't been leading it. The people you thought were leading it hadn't been leading it. Just so you know, people who you never put in authority, people who we never actually put in authority. You've had people leading this thing from behind for months. You've been having people lead this thing from the shadows for months, like puppet masters. Isn't that cool that we didn't tell you that other people were leading the church? Isn't that cool that we deceived you? Isn't that cool that we weren't being honest and transparent? Isn't that awesome that we can just make decisions all on our own? Don't have to ask you guys anything. Oh, man. And it's almost like, and I'm not trying to be too difficult here, but it's almost like he looks at the congregation and goes, isn't it cool how stupid you guys are? And what do? They clap. Yay. Nepotism. And I'm not calling the people at the Potter's house stupid. I'm not calling them names. I'm not calling them anything like that. But when people say things like this, when a pastor comes up on a stage and says something like, oh, hey, you didn't even know, but other people have been running the church unbeknownst to you, you were essentially calling people either sheep that don't ask questions, or you're calling them ignorant, you're calling them dumb, you're calling them stupid. You were implying that because you're saying this to their face like it doesn't even matter that we've hid these things from you. That's my take, okay? Maybe you say, Jeff, you're being too hard on them, but I want to make it clear. I'm not calling anybody names there. That's the way I would take it. If I was a congregant at the Potter's house, I would have been like, oh my gosh, you said that like it was nothing. That bothers me. But instead, again, what do? We clap, and you're going to hear it time and time again in this, yay, nepotism. We got to stop getting excited about nepotism, and we got to start asking questions about nepotism in the church. It's a church, not a family business.
But I wanted to introduce to you your pastors.
So let me introduce you your pastors, my daughter and her husband, my son-in-law, Sarah and Tori.
I know you might be a little scared. I know you might feel the weight sliding from my head to you. I know the crown is heavy.
Did you guys hear that, or was it just me? Because I heard it. The crown is heavy. I know the crown is heavy. T.D. Jakes, you are not a king. You are not an emperor. You are not a monarch. This is not a country you rule. This is not a kingdom you rule. It is not a business that you own. There is no crown involved in church leadership except for the crowns we place at the feet of Jesus, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. And one of the biggest issues that leads to spiritual abuse in the church today is when pastors, elders, and church leaders start thinking they are kings instead of shepherds. Because when a leader starts thinking they are a king instead of a shepherd, then one, they're going to rule with a rod of iron. And there's only one in Scripture who could rule with a rod of iron and do it well, and that is King Jesus. But the other thing that they're going to do is they're going to start competing with the actual king, whether they mean to or not. You can't have two kings in the same kingdom. It doesn't work that way. And in the kingdom of God, there is one king. In the church, there's one king. There's King Jesus. There are no crowns, but we've got too many pastors running around making decisions in their own little fiefdoms they call churches unilaterally with no one holding them accountable or sham boards holding them accountable. And they won't normally say it, but they're running around like kings in their own kingdom, and they use Jesus to sell their kingdom. They use Jesus as a mascot. They use Jesus as an endorsement. And I don't know about you, but I am so stinking tired of that, because where you see a pastor, hear me on this, where you see a pastor who thinks they are a king, you will eventually see spiritual abuse every single time. There are no kings in the church except for King Jesus. Now, most people will not say it out loud. Bishop Jakes is saying all the quiet parts out loud. And maybe, potentially, I don't know this, I'm speculating, that's maybe potentially why they're moving him. I have known of churches where the senior pastor didn't want to go yet, but the senior pastor was getting older, and he started, you guys know, we've all been around family members who, as we get older, we lose our filter. I will probably not be podcasting as a 75, 80-year-old man because I won't have enough of a filter to stay on this mic, okay? As we get older, we lose our filter. And I've seen pastors where they could still do a lot of things well, but they were just saying stuff that was going to get the church in trouble. They were saying the quiet things out loud. So they got pushed out to pasture a little bit earlier for the younger ones who could, not say all the things that people didn't need to hear. Bishop Jakes is saying the quiet things out loud. He's already said, hey, the funny thing is we had these people running the church for months and y'all didn't even know it. Ha, ha, ha. The other thing he said is, hey, guys, I know this crown is heavy. The quiet part out loud. Being a pastor of the Potter's house is like being a king. That's the way he views it. And that's probably the way that we should view it. Just looking at everything else here, there's not a lot of checks and balances, okay? This feels more like an authoritarian monarchy where whoever's the lead pastor, they make the decisions for the entire church, right? But again, some of you will say, Jeff, that's not a big deal. Why are you harping on this so much? I would say it's a massive deal, because I would say, again, he said what he meant. I don't think that was a slip. I don't think that was the wrong words. I think he chose exactly the words that he meant. I know this crown is heavy because he sees this role as a king role, as a monarchical role. And he sees a lot of pastors, like I said, they see these churches as their own fiefdoms. That is a problem.
But I also know that if God is for you.
Now, again, he says, but I know no matter how heavy this is, how scary this is, if God is for you, then who can be against you? And he quotes Romans, and everybody claps. But again, what are we clapping for? Are we really clapping that God is for you? Or are we clapping for, yay, nepotism? That's what I think we're clapping for. Because the reality is, T.D. Jakes is sitting on the stage and he's saying, hey, I know this may be scary. There's a heavy crown. There's all this stuff involved, blah, blah, blah. But if God is for you, yes, God is for you as a person. God is for the church. But we don't hear anything from them talking about how they know God has chosen them to be the next pastors here. The church has not been involved in, God, what do you seeking? God, what do you want for our church? This was a person in T.D. Jakes who seemingly made this decision all on his own. So we got to be careful saying, oh, well, God is for you, so nobody can be against you. If we haven't heard from God, because you don't give me any evidence, you don't really say anything that makes me believe, hey, here is how we heard from God that Sarah and Torre need to be the next lead pastors of the Potter's house, right? So we got to be careful. Here's a red flag you got to look out for. Be careful of churches, especially in nepotistic environments or authoritarian environments. Be careful of fleshly things. Be careful of ego-driven things that are wrapped in scriptural wrapping paper. Because when you wrap something in scriptural, biblical, holy wrapping paper, it sounds good, but does it actually follow scripture? Do you see fruit? Just as you listen to this, I want you to ask, do I see fruit that they consulted God in this decision and that this was absolutely God's decision and God has absolutely made it clear that these two people need to be the next senior pastors? Or do you hear, I made a decision? Okay. Because if it's just one person making a decision, then we can't say, if God is for you, then who can be against you in this role? Because God may not have put them in that role. And here's my fear, much bigger than TD Jakes. One of the reasons why I believe spiritual abuse is growing at such an alarming rate, why church scandals are popping off everywhere, it seems like, I believe it's because we have a whole lot of people who are in pastoral roles who were never called to pastoral roles. They were chosen by a human. They were chosen to step in. They were given an opportunity. We've lost the sense of calling, okay? Because you operate different when you feel called into that role, not just by God, but this church called me, okay? I've been at churches where I got hired, and I've been at churches where the church had to vote, right? Where the church had a say in who was coming in, right? It's very different. One is much more of a sense of calling. So again, I think we got a lot of people in pulpits who they do love Jesus. They do care about the church, but they're there for other reasons than they were called. And I think that gets a bit dangerous when we lose that sense of calling.
Who can be against you? And as long as I can, I'll be somewhere in the shadows, on the stage, wherever you need me to make this vision come to pass. What say you?
Did you hear that? Again, I think he may have just said the quiet part out loud again. He said, wherever you need me, but he also said, I'm going to be around, whether that's in the shadows, whether that's preaching, wherever you need me, I'm going to be around. And again, I asked, did you just say the quiet part out loud? Because you've already told us that they were leading in the shadows while you were still supposed to be the leader. And my question is, how many people are leading in the shadows? It is very important when you go to a church, okay? It is very important that you understand who leads this church. And it needs to be more than one person. Who is the plurality of elders, the plurality of people who lead this church? And if they're not doing their job well, who are the leaders that we go to who would hold them accountable? Okay, because there's got to be accountability for the elders inside that church. If you do not know the people who are leading your church, you do not know who to go to for accountability, that is not a safe church. And you probably need to leave that church if they can't tell you that. Okay, first thing, ask questions. But if they can't tell you that, won't tell you that, that's a bit of a problem, okay? And it sounds like nobody knows exactly who's leading this church except for TD Jakes. The other thing, if you ask who is leading this church and you get one person, or you get one person on the board, find out how many people on that board are family members and how many people on that board are employees of the church. Because family members are not going to hold that pastor accountable, and employees whose paychecks they sign are not going to hold them accountable. The board needs to be independent, meaning they don't take any money from the church. They are not related in any way so that they can be independent. And at SAI, we give recommendations to churches. They split their board, that the board is majority independent, but from the church, but some are completely independent. That there's a certain percentage that we encourage churches to do. They don't have to do this, but we encourage them. They have a certain percentage that's outside of the church so that they can give fully outside, unbiased, just kind of thoughts on this, right? So again, if it's one person or it's one person and a board and the board is all tied to that person, that is not healthy leadership.
To this moment.
It's hard to put into words, but we feel deeply honored. It is not something to take lightly, transparently. So we stand on solid ground and a sure foundation, and we will honor it, respect it. And so we will build on it with humility, with prayer, with integrity, with holiness, with sacrifice, and we'll become everything that we have to become. We'll shape, we'll stretch, and be everything that we have to be in order to take your legacy and your legacy to the level that God envisions.
But did you hear what they just said? Again, it was, we're going to honor your legacy. They made it very clear now. We're going to honor your legacy. This is about your legacy. So all the stuff that we were asking, they make clear. The focus is on honoring TD's legacy here, the foundation that he's built. It's on respecting what he's built more than it is on what Jesus has called them to do. And that is always a problem. I am hearing a lot more talk about honoring TD Jakes and his legacy than I'm hearing about Jesus and honoring his call and honoring his church and submitting to his will, which is, again, always a problem. But now we get to hear that was Torre. That was Sarah's husband. So that's T.D. Jake's son-in-law. Now let's hear from Sarah.
I'll agree that this isn't exactly how we saw my life panning out. I saw my parents sacrifice their lives.
All right. So before she gets into sacrifice, let's talk about this. There's, again, a lot of just kind of cheering and applause as she says, this is not how any of us saw my life playing out. And I just wonder, was there a time where God changed what you felt your calling was, where God changed your trajectory? Or was this, hey, no one would have looked at my life and said, I show any fruit or calling or gifting to be the pastor of this church until I was asked? Those are two very different things. I don't know, Sarah. I don't know the situation. I'm not going to speak into that. But what I am going to say is it sounds like from what she's saying, pretty much anybody looking on the outside would have been like, I don't think this is where you're going to go. So if God changed that, that's one thing. If God didn't change that, then it's more of an indictment. Okay. Because I hear that from a lot of these pastors' kids. Okay. And again, if you are a pastor kid and you're doing your best, I'm not trying to pick on you. Okay. But I've seen a lot of pastors' kids who didn't seem to have any interest in being a pastor. They didn't seem to feel any calling in being a pastor. They didn't seem to show any fruit of gifting to be a pastor. Yet they were tapped on the shoulder for so long when it came time of, hey, it's time for you to run the family business. And I'm calling that a family business because that's what we're acting like these churches are, a family business when we act this way. When it's time to tap you on the shoulder, you step up and all of a sudden you feel called to be a pastor and you're trying to be a pastor, right? That's always concerning to me. All right. I would want to look back and say for a long time, this person's shown evidence of this call. For a long time, this person's shown evidence of this passion. This is what they've been pursuing. This is what they felt God was leading. It always concerns me when someone changes, 5 to 7 years before they become the pastor and they take over that role from their father. Usually that's the time that a transition takes, which means they didn't change their mind until they kind of already had the job. So that would be a concern here. I can't say for sure that happened. They don't give a timeline, but that would be my concern.
For this church, I saw them give their bodies and their strength. And I know you guys are so tired. You had a heart attack on stage and still asked for the microphone so that they would be okay over you. I know what this cost.
So let me ask you this question. Is that healthy ministry? I don't think it's healthy ministry. Like I hear that and people are clapping and it's like, yeah, Bishop Jakes, you gave so much of your life for this and it sounds good, but I look at it and I'm like, I don't think, we're supposed to be willing to give our lives to protect the sheep. We're not supposed to sacrifice our lives for the sake of the organization. We're not supposed to, be pushing ourselves to unhealthy degrees where we're having heart attacks on stage because we're trying to do too much. We're not supposed to sacrifice our family on the altar of ministry. Those aren't things that we're called to do. And I think when you have a healthy church with a healthy leadership dynamic, you have pastors where people are protecting these pastors and leaders from doing too much. Because again, we don't have to do too much when we recognize that King Jesus is in charge. We work hard, we give our best, and we trust God with everything else. But when we think we are kings and we are monarchs, we do too much. Okay, so that would be my concern. She's already coming into this like, yes, this is heavy. I've seen y'all sacrifice. I know what this costs. Is this going to cost me the same thing? I don't think that's healthy for Bishop Jakes. I don't think that's healthy for Sarah. It's healthy for Torrey. I don't think it's healthy for that church.
And if I'm honest, I've been wondering whether or not I have what it takes to do it the way that you guys have done it or to take it even further. But then God showed me that you all didn't always know if you had what it took either. But that God gave you GPS to find what it took to stand up to the assignment. And I believe that the same God that has ordered your steps to find what it took to stand up in any given moment is going to order our steps to find what it takes.
So a moment of transparency. I wonder if I've got what it takes. I wonder if I've got what it takes. Now, I think everybody in ministry has that. They ask that question at some point. In our flesh, I wonder if I've got what it takes. But through 17 years of ministry, sometimes I wondered if I had what it took to achieve my goals or the goals other people put on me. I don't think I ever really questioned from the moment I felt called to ministry. I don't think I ever questioned, do I have what it takes to be faithful to this calling? Because God gave me the gifts and God gave me the call. So there's a tension there. I understand part of what she's talking about. It concerns me because again, there's a humility. Do I have what it takes? But there's also that question of sometimes God has us asking, do I have what it takes? Because we're trying to do something he hasn't called us to do. Okay. And again, I can't vouch for Sarah's calling. and the specific things God's called her to do, the specific giftings, all of that. I'm not going to get into that. What I'm going to say is there's not been enough talk of Jesus and his calling and him being involved in this process for me to feel comfortable about it. So I'm looking at this and I'm just wondering, hey, I'd love to hear more, because is there a possibility? And I'll just ask this, is there a possibility, the reason why you're wondering if you have what it takes, is there a possibility that that's not your flesh and that that's not the enemy, but that is God asking you, hey, are you really called? Because again, I know some pastors who I think would be incredible people if they were doing something else, but they're doing damage because they're pastoring because it's what their dads expected, when I don't think it was what they were ever called to do. So I think we got to start more conversations about that in the church, not checking people's callings for them, but just saying, hey, just because your parent was a pastor of this church, like that doesn't mean that you're called to be the pastor of this church. And if nothing else, like let's have deep conversations about this so that we are protecting, especially a lot of these, these men, these young men, we're protecting them from going down a road of just trying to be what their dads expect them to be, and really helping them discern calling in their own lives. I think that's important. I think that's good for everybody, because my fear is that we've gotten to the point in the church where people aren't discerning calling for themselves anymore. Someone else is tapping them on the shoulder and going, this is what God told me you need to do. And I think that's very dangerous. We've got to do the work to pursue God and discern his calling for our lives.
To stand up to whatever's on the other side of this, yes. My commitment to you and our commitment to you is that we will seek God every step of the way, that we will pay the price to lead this community, and that we will make decisions not just with you in mind, but with the people who haven't even come into this room in mind.
Now, I think what she's talking about so far, I appreciate this, because this is the most they've talked about Jesus, that we're gonna follow Jesus in this. We're gonna do this with Jesus in mind. But she's about to ramp up. I want you to see, notice the difference. She is going from humility, do I have what it takes? We're doing this for Jesus, to all of a sudden she's going to ramp into vision casting mode and expansion, right? And again, is it bad for a church to grow? No. But one thing that you will notice in nepotistic successions, okay? One thing that I used to tell leaders as a leadership consultant, I would tell leaders all the time, especially in the corporate world, when you take over for a well-known leader, you take over for an established leader, you need to take the first 6, 12, maybe 18 months and don't change a thing. Don't change a thing unless you have to. You need to take time to listen to everybody involved. You need to take time to understand everything that's going on. You need to get the DNA, so that when you do make a change, you're making the changes that are needed from listening to the people, okay? Not just making changes, because if you come in and you try to make changes real quick, one, people aren't going to like the changes potentially because they're so different and jolting from the other leader, right? But here's the other problem. I would warn leaders, I would say, we always want to make our mark. And if you want to make your mark, you're going to make changes that don't need to be made just so that you can prove I'm the guy, I'm the girl, I'm the person for this job. And I'm going to make changes just so I can prove to you I'm smart enough to do it. And those changes rarely ever work out. I would say the same thing in the church world. She's about to ramp into this really, really big vision. And I would say I would encourage you to be in a space of listening. You're taking over one of the biggest churches in the country. You've never led anything like this. And you're doing it in the shadow of your father and your father-in-law. Like, I would take some time to be listening and to be praying and to be figuring out. But very quickly, again, it goes from humility. We're doing this for Jesus. I want you to listen to this big expansion vision. And this is what I notice so often in churches with nepotistic successions. It seems like from the moment the church hears about it, there is a big vision of big expansion, bigger than daddy did it, bigger than the people before me. God's got something amazing to do, but it's always bigger. And they're talking about it immediately. And it's almost like I've got to put my stamp on this place. I got to make sure that it's mine now. It's not my dad's. And it reminds me in scripture of Solomon's son taking over after him. And his advisor said, hey, your dad was really hard. He was really hard on people. If you just give these people a little bit of a break, they will follow you, right? But if you keep being harder on them, there's going to be a problem. You need to give them a break and be a kinder king than your father, because your father was a good king, but right now they need a different kind of king, right? What does Solomon's son say? Instead, he goes, no, you don't understand. I'm better than my dad. I'm bigger than my dad. If my dad was hard on him, I'm going to be way harder on him. And I'm going to make him work twice as hard. I'm going to beat him with whips and blah, blah. And he did that. And then he lost the kingdom. He lost the people, right? So that's what I hear in a lot of these nepotistic successions. What I'm always looking for is Do you have a leader who is spending some time listening, being faithful, and just trying to faithfully lead the congregation they have and get to know them? Or is there an immediate, massive expansion vision that they're trying to chase? And if so, why? Have we lost the ability to celebrate faithfulness and not always have to be expanding, expanding, expanding? Do we want people to be saved? Yes. Do we want the kingdom to grow? Yes. But there's times to just be faithful, serving the people that you have. Nothing grows all the time without stop except for cancer. Okay, it's a problem. So it's always something to watch out for.
I believe that collectively that we could turn this city upside down and right side up, and that what happens in Dallas will overflow and saturate the state of Texas. And when the state of Texas can't hold it anymore, Oklahoma, get ready, get ready, get ready, get ready. And when Oklahoma gets to the overflow, you better move over Nevada. I believe that this nation will be changed by the collective anointing, not just because of what we carry, but because of what we carry in unity and collectively.
Did you hear that change? Like, she went immediately from broken humility to the pastor voice, the music behind me, the big vision, her husband just holding up his hand like, that's us. We're going to do that. We're going to take it to Oklahoma. We're going to take it to Nevada, and we're going to take over Texas, right? And it's like a kingdom expanding. But is it God's kingdom or is it your plans? I'm just going to tell you that shift was so fast, it feels scripted to me. And it feels like now it doesn't feel as authentic as it did a moment ago, but now it feels like this is scripted. Let us share our vision that we've already been planning, and we got to do it better than Dad did it, right? T.D. Jakes is like an entrepreneurial mogul. He's done stuff that if they try to be like him, it is going to be an epic failure. Instead, they need to say, God, what are you asking us to do? And I don't know, in this moment, taking over this massive transition, I just don't know that already talking about expansion into Oklahoma and Nevada and taking over the whole state of Texas is smart. It's, hey, what is God saying to our church right now? We're going to get to know you all. We're going to begin to pastor you all. I would like to hear a little bit more of that humility for a little longer rather than immediately going into this massive vision. Also, if you notice on the screen right now, they've already got the website up for the, the pottershousedallas.org, tphd.org/evolution. So they've already got this kind of whole marketing plan for this evolution of leadership, this evolution of legacy. Yet the church has had no voice in this. And again, it just feels like they looked around and said, which family member do we have that can take over the family business?
And so I am asking that you would bring your oil into this room, that you would bring your vision into this room. And if you're nervous like me or anxious like me, that's okay, because together we'll do it in strength.
Together. We'll do it in strength. I'm so scared, but we can do it together. Why would I believe that if you didn't involve me? The church has not been involved in this decision whatsoever. So if they weren't a part of this decision, they weren't a part of this calling of a new pastor, why are they going to believe that you need them to do anything else? You're going to do what you want to do, right? The reality is those moments are a lot of times, hey, I need you to bring your unity, which means don't complain about it being different. You be in unity. And if you have any concerns about the new leadership or the new direction, you're outside of unity. No, we just have concerns about the new leadership and the new direction. And hopefully you would listen. And listen like Solomon's son didn't, instead of being just like Solomon's son. Okay. We need you to bring your oil. What that means, let's translate that. That means we need you to bring your gifting and your time. We need you to keep serving. Okay. So don't complain, keep serving and keep giving. We're going to do it together, and the reality is, in a lot of big churches like this, the only way that we do things together, the only way we do ministry together is I come and I serve that role you tell me to, and I give my money and I don't complain. When the reality is, if we look at the early church, everybody came in and had a role. Multiple people taught, multiple people prophesied, multiple people were working on hospitality, multiple people sang a song. Everybody had a role because this is our church. We don't just have people doing this for us and asking us to fund it and give money to it. We're all doing this together. This idea of this being our church has been lost. So I struggle with, hey, we're going to need you. We're going to do this together. Even though you had no idea this was happening and we made this complete decision about the new leadership of our church without you. That doesn't sound like a church where everybody's involved. It sounds like a church with a monarch at the helm or a dictator at the helm that is calling all the shots and makes the decisions. And it's essentially, hey, could you guys help us? Could you keep serving? Could you keep giving? Could you not complain while we switch monarchs? That's what this feels like to me. But I would love to hear from you all. Am I being too hard on it? Is that how you're seeing it? Do you have concerns about this? Because I have a lot of concerns, but also have you seen these same red flags in other churches? Because if you look at big mega churches, this is not all of them, but if you look at the mega church landscape right now, the mega church movement is young. And that means that the majority of these mega church pastors are just now, either in the past like 10 years or a ton in the coming 10 years, are getting old enough where they're going to be retiring. And when you look at this, the vast majority of megachurch transitions, the plan and playbook seems to be, watch it, who is the closest family member that can take over? If there is a son, it will be one of the sons, if at all possible. And if it is not a son, it is most of the time going to be either a daughter or a brother or a nephew or some family member like that. And then in some cases, and I will say this, I'll give credit, Chris Hodges transferred leadership earlier this year, and he didn't give that to one of his sons. He actually, gave the leadership to Mark Pettis. But the reality is, it still felt like he just gave leadership away. So again, does it look like they're running a playbook where they're picking leaders, or is the church involved in this? And the next thing that we're going to talk about with Ben Young and Second Baptist is what a lot of churches are doing to keep from letting the church have a voice in these new leaders, right? So there's just a lot of concerns there. And if you see some of those concerns, red flags, I'd love to see them as well. But again, this isn't just TD Jakes. This isn't just one church. This is a lot.